The morning Petra Voss took on a stranger with no coat and no coin to his name. The dye vats were already 3 days behind, and her best journeyman had walked off the job, without so much as a note left on the door. She had not slept. She knew she looked it. Her hands were stained to the wrists in indigo. They always were this time of year, and there was a smear of weld yellow along her left forearm that she had given up trying to scrub out. The Voss Dye Works had been her father's before it was hers, and his father's before that, and she had learned the trade the way she had learned everything. By doing it, by failing, by doing it again, until her fingers knew the motions better than her mind did. She was standing at the gate, checking the morning's delivery of woad when she saw him. He was sitting on the low stone wall across the lane, not in the way of anything, not begging, just sitting. He had the look of a man who had been walking a very long time, and had simply decided that here, in front of the Dye Works on Chalkers Lane in the town of Briarwick, was as good a place as any to stop. His coat was gone. She would learn later it had been traded for bread somewhere outside of Linwick, 3 days north. His shirt was decent but thin. He had dark circles under his eyes and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in better than a week. He was also, she noticed despite herself, built in the way a man is built when he has spent years doing actual physical work. Broad through the shoulder, steady in how he held himself even in exhaustion. She should have walked past him. She had enough trouble. She did not walk past him. "You look like you know what hard work is," she said. He looked up. His eyes were grey. She noticed that too, and told herself it was not relevant. "I've done my share," he said. "Can you lift? Yes. Can you stir without stopping for 20 minutes at a stretch?" He looked at the vats visible through the open gate behind her, the great wooden paddles, the steam rising despite the cold morning air. "Yes, room and board and a wage at week's end," she said. "No questions about where you've come from. You leave when you want to leave, but if you walk off mid-batch, I'll dock the full day." He was quiet for a moment. She had the sense he was weighing something that had nothing to do with the wage. "All right," he said, and stood. And that was how Fen Aldecott came to work at the Voss Dye Works. She called him Fen, because that was the name he gave her. She did not ask for the rest of it. In Briarwick, men passed through on their way to the mills further east, or the shipping yards at the coast, and it was not unusual for a working man to be light on his history. Petra's father had taught her to judge a man by whether he showed up on time, and whether he did what he said he would do. By those measures, Fen was the best worker she had taken on in 3 years. He showed up the first morning before she had unlocked the main door. He learned the mordanting process in a single day. The alum baths, the tannin rinse, the sequence of steps that made the colour bond to the wool rather than wash out in the first rain. He asked questions that told her he understood what he was looking for, not just repeating back what she said, but actually thinking about why the process worked the way it did. By the end of the first week, he could manage the indigo vats without her standing over him, which meant she could finally get to the accounts that had been piling up on the desk in her father's old office. Her brother Tobias came by on the Thursday. He was 20, gangly, studying law in the city and home for a fortnight, and he had the habit of wandering into the works and leaning in doorways with his arms crossed, performing the role of concerned male relation. "Who's the new man?" Tobias said. "His name is Fen. He's good with the vats. Where's he from?" "I didn't ask." Tobias made a face that she had seen him make since he was 12 years old. "Petra. He shows up. He does the work. The indigo batch came out cleaner than anything we've turned since spring." She looked up from the ledger. "That's all I need to know." Tobias left, unconvinced, but he always left. That was the thing about Tobias. He worried and then he went back to his books. It was the cold that made her notice him differently. Or perhaps it was not the cold. Perhaps the cold was only the occasion, and she had been noticing him for longer than she wanted to admit. The temperature dropped sharply in the second week of November, the kind of cold that came in off the hills and stayed, and she came out to the yard one evening after closing to find him still working. Not because he had been asked to, but because the evening batch had thickened in the vat and needed another half-hour of stirring, or it would be ruined by morning. He had not mentioned it. He had simply stayed and done it. She leaned in the doorway and watched him for a moment. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow despite the cold, because the steam from the vat kept the air around him warm. He stirred with a long, steady rhythm, and she could see the muscles in his forearms move, and she looked at the floor instead. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "The batch would have turned. You could have come to get me." He paused, considered. "You were in the office. You had the lamp on. You looked like you were working on something that mattered." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said, "I'll add the hour to Friday's wage." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She brought him tea, the thick, overbrewed kind from the pot that sat on the little iron stove in the back room, and she sat on an upturned bucket and watched him finish the batch, and they talked. About dye processes at first, about the particular difficulty of getting a true scarlet without cochineal, which was expensive, about whether there was a market for over-dyed cloth, indigo first, then a weld yellow on top to get green, or whether the Briarwick merchants were too conservative to try it. He had opinions, not loud ones, but real ones, informed ones, and he didn't back away from them when she pushed. She went to bed that night thinking about the way he had said, "You looked like you were working on something that mattered," and she stared at the ceiling for a long time before she fell asleep. She was, by any accounting, a practical woman. She had been practical at 16 when her mother died, and she took over the running of the household alongside her father. She had been practical at 19 when she married Donald Voss, a kind man, a good man, who had died of a fever 3 years into their marriage and left her the works and a modest debt and no children, which she had come to regard as perhaps a mercy. She had been practical at 22 when she paid off the debt herself, dye lot by dye lot, and decided that she did not particularly want to remarry, and that anyone who had a problem with that could take their cloth business elsewhere. She was 27 now, and she was trying very hard to be practical about Fen. The problem was that Fen was not easy to be practical about. It wasn't only that he was good at the work, it was that he cared about it. He asked her, one afternoon in late November, whether she had ever experimented with resistance dyeing, the technique of binding off sections of cloth before dyeing so that the dye couldn't reach them, leaving a pattern. She said she knew of it but hadn't tried it. He said he had seen it done once, a long time ago, by someone who had learned the method in the south. He thought it might work with her indigo vats if the binding was tight enough. They spent a Sunday afternoon testing it, just the two of them in the empty works, the rest of the staff gone for the day. They ruined 3 small cloth samples and got one that was almost right, and when the pattern held, a rough, cloud-like resist mark against the deep blue, she actually laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and he smiled in a way she hadn't seen him smile before, open and unguarded, and she thought, "Oh, this is going to be a problem." The problem arrived from the east on a Tuesday in the form of a letter. She didn't see it, she didn't know about it, but Fen did, because it was delivered to him, slipped under the door of the small room above the cooperage next door where he boarded, addressed in a hand she would have recognized, if she had been there to see it, as formal and precise and expensive. She knew something had changed because he was quiet on the Wednesday. Not sullen. Fen was never sullen, but quieter than usual, and once she caught him standing at the far end of the yard, looking at nothing in particular with an expression she couldn't read. "Trouble," she said. "Nothing that concerns the works," he said. She let it go. She had a policy about not asking. She had built the entire arrangement on not asking. By Thursday he was himself again, or something close to it, and she told herself she had imagined the change. She had not imagined it. The man who came on the Friday was not from Briarwick. He arrived in a carriage, a fine one, dark and well-kept, with a coat of arms on the door that Petra did not recognize. He was perhaps 50, well-dressed, with the manner of someone accustomed to waiting for people and finding it slightly beneath him. He asked for her by name at the gate. She came out with indigo on her hands, and no patience for visitors who arrived without warning on the last working day of the week. "Mrs. Voss," he said. He had a slight accent, southern, educated. "I beg your pardon for the intrusion. My name is Harwick. I serve the Duke of Aldenvane. I am looking for a man I believe may be in your employ," she said, very carefully. "A great many men have been in my employ. This one would have arrived in late October. Tall, dark, goes by a shortened name." She kept her face still. She had spent 3 years running a business in a town that did not entirely believe she ought to be running it, and she had learned to keep her face very still. What business do you have with him? That is a matter between my employer and... He paused. He looked at her more closely. Something in her expression, perhaps, told him that she was not someone who would be satisfied with that answer. There are matters of his estate requiring his attention. His presence has been required for some weeks now. His family is concerned. His family, she repeated. His Grace, the man said, has been absent from his duties for nearly 2 months. The yard felt very quiet suddenly. The sound of the vats, which she normally didn't notice anymore, seemed very loud. "I'll let him know you called," she said. She found Fen in the drying room, checking the hanks that had come out of the weld bath that morning. She stood in the doorway. He turned, and something in her face must have told him immediately, because his own expression shifted. Not guilty, not caught out, but braced, ready. "A man named Harwick," she said. "He came in a carriage. He said he serves the Duke of Aldenvane." She paused. "He was looking for a man matching your description." The silence lasted 3 full seconds. "Petra," he said, "is that your name? Fen, is any of it your name?" "Fenwick," he said. "It's Fenwick. It is my name. It's just not the whole of it." She looked at him. She had been looking at him for 6 weeks, and she had thought she was fairly good at reading him by now. She understood, in that moment, that there were entire rooms in him she had never seen. "What's the rest of it?" He was quiet for just a moment longer. Then, Fenwick Aldecott Rain, the Duke of Aldenvane. The drying room was warm and smelled of weld, a green, grassy smell she had always liked. She noticed this because noticing practical things was how she managed herself in moments when she might otherwise not manage herself well. "You came here with nothing," she said. "No coat, no coin. I left the coat deliberately. I left everything deliberately." He turned to face her fully. "I had been the Duke of Aldenvane for 18 months, and I had never once done anything without 10 people watching, and 4 of them taking notes. I needed to know if I could be useful, if I could do something real. If a person would look at me and see something worth keeping on. Something worth keeping on," she said flatly. "I know how it sounds, do you?" There was an edge in her voice that she hadn't quite intended. "Do you know how it sounds to someone who cannot walk away from her name? Who cannot leave her title on a wall peg and see how the world treats her without it?" She thought of every merchant who had made her repeat herself, every solicitor who had spoken past her to her brother. Every morning she had opened the gate herself, and every evening she had closed it herself, and every month she had made the sums work through sheer stubbornness. "I cannot be Petra Voss without the works and see what happens. I am Petra Voss because of the works. There is no version of me that gets to disappear and find out how the world treats a nobody." He didn't flinch from it. She had half expected him to, had half expected the Duke of Aldenvane to smooth it over, to apologise neatly and pivot. He didn't. "You're right," he said. "That's true, and I don't have an answer for it. I'm not going to tell you it was the same." "Good," she said. Because it wasn't. She left him standing in the drying room with the yellow-green smell of weld around him, and walked back to her office and shut the door, and sat down at her father's desk, and didn't cry, because she was Petra Voss and she did not have time to cry. But she sat there for a long time with her indigo-stained hands flat on the desk and looked at the ledger without seeing it. Harwick came back on Saturday morning. Petra told him that Fenwick Rain had been informed of his visit and would send word through the appropriate channels, Pels, when he was ready to receive correspondence. Harwick looked at her with barely concealed frustration and said that the matter was rather more urgent than that, and she said pleasantly that she was sure it was, and showed him back out the gate. She did not see Fenwick all of Saturday. He did his work, she did hers. The staff, to their credit, seemed to sense that something had shifted and kept admirably to their own business. On Sunday he knocked at the door of the office. She let him in. She was mending a harness. The yard horse had been fighting his bridle, and she didn't put it down because having something to do with her hands made everything easier. "I owe you an honest account," he said, and she said nothing, which he correctly interpreted as permission to continue. He told her. He told her about the title coming to him unexpectedly, a cousin dying without heirs, and the way 18 months of dukedom had felt like being steadily assembled into a shape he didn't recognise. He told her about riding north on a horse he'd eventually left at a stable in Linwick, trading his coat for bread, walking the last 30 miles because he needed to walk, because he needed to feel his legs under him and the road under his feet and the cold air in his lungs, and know he was a person. Just a person, not a title with a person installed inside it. He told her that the works had given him something he hadn't expected, the particular satisfaction of a thing done well. The way a good indigo batch felt like an achievement in a way that signing papers in a panelled room never had. He told her, finally quietly, that he was sorry, not for who he was, but for the position it had put her in without her knowledge or consent. She set the harness down. "The resist technique," she said. "The binding. You said you'd seen it done once by someone who'd learned it in the South." He looked slightly startled by the pivot. "Yes, where in the South? Valence. There's a tradition of it there. I was on a trip, a diplomatic, it doesn't matter." A slight pause. "I've been further than most." "I expect you have." She looked at him carefully. This was still the same man who had stirred the vats without being asked and brought her the only real laugh she'd had in months. She was trying to reconcile that with a man who had a carriage with a coat of arms and people who took notes on his activities. She was not entirely failing. "What happens now? I have to go back," he said. "There are matters. There are always matters. The estate, the tenants, there are people depending on the management of it. I can't be absent." He met her eyes. "I don't want to leave. What does that mean?" "It means I would like to come back, if there's something here worth coming back to." He said it carefully. Not performing, not smoothing it over. Just saying it, and meaning it, and waiting. Petra looked at her hands, indigo-stained as ever. Then she looked at him. "You would come back as yourself," she said. "The whole of yourself. Not the version that leaves things on pegs. Yes, and I would not be expected to be anything other than what I am. I'm not going to learn to curtsy." Something moved across his face that was almost amusement, but was also something warmer. "I have never once thought about you curtsying." "Good." She was quiet for a moment. "The staff will have questions. I expect they will. I'll handle the staff." She said it in a tone that made clear this was not open to discussion. "You handle Harwick. That I can do. And when you come back," she said, "I want to try a full resist-dyed run. Proper cloth, not samples. If the method works at scale, we could take it to the Edinburgh market in March." He looked at her. "Is that a condition of my return?" "It's a business interest," she said. "The return is separate. A beat. But yes." He left on the Monday with Harwick and the dark carriage, and Petra opened the gate herself at dawn and stood for a moment in the cold grey morning and breathed. Tobias came by that evening and said he had heard something in the town about a duke, and looked at her with wide, alarmed eyes. She sat him down and told him the facts plainly, without embellishment. He went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, outrage on her behalf, a brief flicker of impressed, and then back to worried. She let him process. "Are you? Are you all right?" he said finally. "I'm perfectly all right. But he worked here. He stirred the vats. He was excellent at it." She poured him more tea. "Tobias, I've been running this works for 5 years. I'm not undone by an unexpected duke. I've dealt with worse. I dealt with the Linwick merchant, who tried to short the delivery waits for a solid year." Tobias laughed a little in spite of himself. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish the November orders," she said, "and start planning for March. And he'll come back when he's sorted out whatever needs sorting out, and we'll see what that looks like. That's simple. Nothing about it is simple." She was quiet for a moment, her hands wrapped around her cup. "But it's honest, and I'd rather have something honest and complicated than something easy and false." Tobias looked at her for a moment with the expression he occasionally wore when he forgot he was supposed to be the concerned male relation, and remembered instead that he actually admired her. "You're remarkable, Petra. I know," she said, which made him laugh again, and she felt some of the tightness in her chest ease. He wrote. That was the first thing. Within a fortnight a letter arrived. Proper paper, proper seal, but the handwriting inside was plain and direct, and sounded, somehow, like him. He wrote about the estate business, matter-of-factly, because she had asked him once how the management of a large property actually worked, and he told her as though she were someone who could understand the mechanics of it, which she could. He asked about the November orders. He asked whether the resist technique would scale. He made a wry comment about the quantity of paperwork involved in being a duke, and then immediately apologised for complaining about it to someone who ran her own accounts without an estate secretary. She wrote back on the reverse of a dye lot record because she was in the middle of the works and it was what was to hand. She told him the November orders had come in strong. She told him she'd done a small resist run on a worsted wool and it had held beautifully, that the pattern was clean and the colour hadn't bled, and that she thought the Edinburgh market was viable. She told him the yard horse had finally accepted the new bridle, which she thought he would want to know, because he had taken over the horse's care without being asked, which was a habit of his, she had noticed. The letters became regular. They were not love letters, or they were not only love letters. They were also genuinely correspondence, about the dye trade, about estate management, about the particular problem of indigo sourcing in an uncertain market, about things he had seen and things she had done and things they both wondered about. It was, she thought, the most naturally she had ever communicated with anyone. He came back in February, unannounced, well, mostly unannounced. Harwick had sent a note that arrived 2 days before he did, which she chose to regard as a reasonable notice period. He came in a plain carriage this time, without the coat of arms. She was in the yard when it pulled up, checking a delivery, and she looked up and he was standing there in a good coat, with the cold reddening his face, and looking at her like she was the fixed point on a horizon he'd been navigating toward. "The weld bath," she said. "The morning delivery needs checking. The grade looks low." "Show me," he said. She showed him. He understood what to look for. Of course he did. She had taught him. They went through the delivery together, rejected 2 bundles, negotiated with the merchant, who seemed somewhat thrown by the presence of a well-dressed stranger, who nonetheless spoke with the authority of someone who had actually worked the process. When the merchant left, diminished, with 2 fewer bundles and the correct assurances for replacement stock, Fenn stood beside her at the yard gate and exhaled. "You're very good at that," he said. "I've had practice." She looked at him sideways. "How long can you stay?" "A fortnight. Perhaps 3 weeks, if I can arrange some of the correspondence to be sent here." He paused. "With your permission. You want to work correspondence from the Dye Works." "I want to be here," he said plainly. "The correspondence is just what comes with me." She considered this. She had thought about what it would look like. Practically, a duke conducting his business from the office of a working dye works, letters going back and forth on Chalkers Lane, the staff adjusting, the town adjusting, her adjusting. It was not simple. He had said so himself, that first Sunday. She had said so too. It was also, she had decided, the most honest arrangement she had been offered in her life. A man who wanted to be in the same room where the work was done, who wanted her as she actually was, who didn't need her to become someone else. "The desk in the office is small," she said. "I don't need much space. Tobias will be insufferable about this. I can manage Tobias. You've never had to manage Tobias." "I've managed dukes," he said. "I've managed estate solicitors and hereditary peers and a dowager countess who informed me at dinner that I hold my fork incorrectly. Tobias is 20 and wants to be a lawyer. I'll be fine." She felt the laugh come up before she could decide whether to let it out, and she let it out, and it sounded the way laughter sounded when you'd been keeping it held in for a while. "Come inside," she said. "I'll show you what we've done with the resist method." He followed her in through the gate, and she latched it behind them both, and the works closed around them. The warmth of the vats, the green grass smell of weld, the indigo blue light that the windows made in winter when the sky was white. And he stopped in the middle of the yard and looked up at it, like he was looking at something that mattered to him. And she knew the feeling exactly, because she looked at it that way every morning. The Edinburgh order came in at the end of March, the largest the Voss Dye Works had ever filled. The resist-dyed cloth moved in a single day. A merchant from Inverness wrote asking if they could supply more, and what the method was called, and whether the dyer took commissions. Petra wrote back herself, in her own hand, with indigo on her fingers, and signed the letter Petra Voss, Voss Dye Works, Briarwick, the same as she always had, and she thought that was right. That was exactly right.